All right, so my pearl today is for the bio majors and for the business majors. I realize that a lot of our pearls are neglecting you groups there, so I wanted to give you something to hopefully motivate you in this time. Some of this the sophomores will have seen, but some of it is new. So I'm actually going to share my screen here. This came from some thoughts. When I was in med school, I heard a lecture once that got my mind going, and so I'm gonna share some elements of this in this talk this morning here. So share screen. All right, there we go. So this organism right here, some of you recognize it. Maybe those of you in the microbiology course recognize this organism. This is cholera. This is Vibrio cholera. This has killed many people over the centuries, and it still does today. It's famous for causing a watery diarrhea, and standard of care in the U.S. is basically rehydration, antibiotics. It's actually very easy to treat, but unfortunately, if you don't have basic medical supplies, you can perish as a result of this disease. And the question that was posed to me when I was in med school was this organism designed by God? And so a lot of us who have an intelligent design perspective are faced with a pretty interesting challenge, which is like when God said it was good at the creation, did he include in that cholera and HIV and all of these different kinds of organisms? Or do we have to think in a different way, in a broader way? And in fact, maybe there's a better way to understand the world, is that there wasn't just one intelligent designer at work, but there were two forces at work, two intelligent beings at work. One was God creating the world, and the second was Satan, who was corrupting the world. And then in fact, what we see in a lot of the organisms that exist in the world today, they're in fact, in some sense, the product of satanic activity. That's very interesting from an apologetic perspective, because a lot of people struggle to explain why the world would be, why God would call the world good, even with organisms like cholera and HIV, which are seemingly so evil, that seemingly are so well designed at destroying life and causing pathology. This is a really interesting verse from Jesus in Luke chapter 10, where he says, "Behold, I give you the authority to trample on serpents and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy." And so we notice here something, that there are beings in the created world, serpents and scorpions, that are associated with here being the power of the enemy. And so I take this as Jesus affirming this concept that at least elements of creation have the enemy, have satanic powers in some sense associated with them, perhaps even designed into them. Another place to see that this is really interesting here is in Luke chapter 13, verse 16, where Jesus speaks and he says, "So ought not this woman, being a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has bound," think of it, "for 18 years, be loose from this bond on the Sabbath." So notice here that this illness, which we don't exactly know what it is, but whatever this illness is that this lady is suffering from, Jesus clearly attributes this to satanic activity. And so in the previous passage, we saw creatures, scorpions and serpents. And here we have diseases that are described as being part of the satanic realm. And so again, I think this further supports the idea that when we look around the world today, we should see, in fact, satanic explanations as a better explainer, rather than God being the one to whom all of these causes are attributed. This is Acts chapter 10, verse 38, where it says, "God anointed Jesus of Nazareth with the Holy Spirit and with power, who went about doing good and healing all who were oppressed by the devil, for God was with him." So again, very similar idea here, where these diseases, these different conditions that Jesus was healing people from, he was in fact rescuing them from the devil. and God is in a sense at war with these satanic powers. So this is really interesting and important because it says that in 1 John 3:8, the Son of God appeared to destroy the works of the devil. He came to destroy the works of the devil. That there's at least a way of thinking about what Jesus does when he comes to this earth as destroying the works of the devil. Now, what this means is that those of us who are engaged in work like trying to find a vaccine or trying to remedy a disease, which I'm hoping many of our biology majors are going to pursue either through research or through medical care. This is continuing by extension the work of the Son of God, who came and continues to destroy the works of the devil through all of us who are engaged in this enterprise. And in fact, it is deeply and very meaningfully Christian activity to be involved in this kind of work. I'm going to conclude with this verse here. It's a very interesting verse. There's a lot of debate on how to interpret this verse. John 14:12, where Jesus says, "Most assuredly I say to you, he who believes in me, the works that I do, he will do also, and greater works than these he will do, because I go to my Father." And so again, there's a lot of debate about this, and I'm not necessarily going to go through all the explanations here, but I'm going to throw out at least a possibility for a pretty tantalizing explanation for what Jesus means by this. And in particular, it's this greater works concept. So the first thing that a lot of people do is they assume that Jesus is speaking about like doing miracles. They assume that he means like he fed 5,000, someone else is going to do a miracle and fed 10,000 supernaturally. And it's possible that that's what's meant by that. But I at least think that there's multiple ways to understand this particular verse, and I would advocate that the word greater here can also mean more numerous, and that in fact what followers of Jesus can do, especially those in the business world and in the world of health sciences, is something really exciting, which is in fact do greater works than Jesus did, in the sense of not merely healing, let's say, 500 people or 1,000 people with the disease, but actually eliminating the disease entirely. So think about what the scientific and health communities have done with smallpox. You can make a case that is something that is a greater work than even what Jesus himself did, and that they eliminated completely an entire disease there. Or those who are involved in the business world. Again, we don't necessarily just need to think about this in a supernatural sense. Those who are involved in supply chains and that are involved in bringing food to millions of people, not just thousands of people. This is, I think, a great case could be made that this is in fact what Jesus is talking about here, that his disciples, his followers would go on in the health sciences, in the business world, and do greater works in eradicating these strongholds of Satan, feeding more people, clothing more people, and extending the work that he began to all the corners of the world. So when you think about it like this, all the things that you are studying in your courses, and like I said, especially those of you doing biology and doing business here, I think you should think about that as being an extension of what John 14:12 and those previous passages are all about. That's the conclusion of my pearl.